Hello, my friends. Welcome to Rupa's Six Questions for Authors. Today, it's a real pleasure for me to invite my friend, mentor, guide, and colleague, Alan Culler, to the show. I'm Rupa Unikrishnan, Chief Strategy and Innovation and Corporate Development Officer by day, and author the rest of the time. I'm now also a crime fiction author, and the role has inspired me. In my multiple roles, have inspired me to ask six questions that examine the intersection of analytical rigor with creative storytelling. Every author I've spoken to has shone a light on whole new perspectives on this wonderful and amazing and slightly painful task of telling stories in words on a page. Alan, what can I say about Alan? Alan Culler has had four careers: actor, booking agent for celebrity speakers, change consultant, and now writer. What is the thread between all of those experiences, and how did that lead him to finally publish? So, Alan, tell us a little bit about your books.
Well, it's great to be here, Rupa. We have known each other for a while, and I have been, I've seen you grow as a writer, and now I'm a writer too. God, who would have thunk it? Um, so I started, I started writing, probably very young, but it's only recently that I started to write books. And so I wrote a book for consultants called Traveling the Consulting Road, which is basically career advice for new consultants. And I just wanted to share what my learning was for the 37 years I spent as a consultant. Then I started to write for leaders, and I wrote Change Leader Who Me, which is basically a tongue-in-cheek kind of look at leading change, because it took me a long time to realize that as a consultant, I was actually a change leader. I know that might seem silly, but it did take me a long time to realize that. Um, the thread you said in my four careers, I think is something about storytelling. There was a consultant once I worked with at Gemini Consulting who every time I started to tell a story, she would say, "We don't have time for one of your stories. Come on, we got to do this." But I guess telling stories is part of my normal way of being in the world.
Right, right. And there is always time for stories.
I hope so. I hope so.
Well, and I'll tell the audience this that Alan is the first person outside of family who usually gets my manuscripts, whether it's business or on fiction. I'm like, is this real, Alan? And Alan is usually full of great ideas on how to make it better and also the encouraging words. So there you
Yeah.
go. Well,
Well, you're a great writer, Rupa. I really enjoy your stuff, so
but I do enjoy your stories too. So
no,
you'll
good.
always find a year for your stories here. So
Um,
six questions, all right?
no,
So the
oh,
first
sounds
one,
good.
all right. I call the first one the origin spark. Every writer has a first idea, the one that made them think, I have to write this. What was yours? And did it ever actually become one of your books?
Well, as I said, I've kind of always been a writer, so I remembered recently a story I wrote when I was 10, which was a fiction story, and the teacher who asked for it was not expecting fiction and didn't like it very much. But I think probably the first, I started writing as a consultant on the British Airways project, and anybody who knows me knows I talk about this project far too much. I won't go into it, but it was the privatization of British Airways, and I wrote Communicating the Change, which basically wrote for our team of consultants. But somebody gave it to Colin Marshall, who was the chief executive at the time, and he liked it. And that probably was the worst thing he ever did to me because I kept writing things to leave behind and leave behind and leave behind at places. I wrote things down from the weirdest places. The guy who cut my hair, Miko, I
Like I know
would
him well.
just, he would just start telling stories, and I'd write them down. And I asked him what the secret of life was. And, he said, well, the secret of life is that you got to give something back. And, so I thought, wow, that's kind of profound, actually. Um, and I produced a series of what I called the Miko papers. There were 6 stories, and one made the first book, one made the second book, and 4 of them are going to make the third book.
That's fab.
And he is pleased to have them written down, and he's waiting for the third book if I ever get it published.
He's got to play a walk-on part to one of your readings then. So I
Yeah.
get the sense of the source of your ideas as sources of your ideas as well as the how. But talk me through really what I call the my second question of my 6, which is the process ritual, right? What does writing actually look like for you on a typical day? Not some romanticized version that we hear about, Roald Dahl, etc., coming in, sitting down with his writing robe, but the real one. What does the work honestly look like?
So I read what writers say about this a lot. Stephen King gets up and writes at least 1,000 words before breakfast.
Right,
I can't do anything before breakfast, and certainly not before coffee. So,
right,
but I think that these days, I tend to write to a deadline. I've had deadlines my whole life. And so these days, the big deadline is the blog, Wisdom from Unusual Places,
right,
which comes out on Tuesday. So, so the previous Friday, I start thinking about, well, what am I going to write about?
right.
And I come up with 3 or 4 things. I write something about consulting, something about leading, and something about living, and they go in an order. So that, it's sort of like in the morning I get up and I pick the t-shirt I'm going to wear, and that dictates what shirt I'm going to put on over it. Uh, so on Friday, I know I have to write, something for leading this coming up. And so I'll start thinking about, well, what are all the things I can write about? And it sometimes is harder than others. And sometimes I'll say, I can't write about leading this week. I have to write this story or something like that.
Right.
Then I'll write, I tend to write longhand first, few ideas, sometimes an outline. Sometimes the outline is very, very rough, but longhand before I put my fingers on the keyboard because I don't touch type. I use I I use maybe 2 fingers, of each hand. And then when I start writing, it it usually flows. I can get 1,000 words out in, a very short period of time. 1,000 to 1,500 words out. And then I go back. I've learned that it's better not to fall in love with that draft. It's better to edit. Um, the blog, I mostly edit myself. The books, I am married to a professional editor, Billy, who who is sometimes brutal. I used to cry when she would hand me things with red ink everywhere, but now she uses track changes, and that's easier because I can just say, "Oh, I get it. I'll take that.
You
I'll
can
take
just hit accept.
that." Accept, accept, accept. Oh no, I don't like this one. I have to rewrite that and do something there.
Now that's amazing. By the way, you are, I want to say 90% of my partners in crime on this podcast have been longhand writers for the first draft, and
Hmm.
that surprised me the first couple of times I've heard it because I play around with it, and then I'm straight on the computer. So
Hmm.
I need to experiment and see what that would do to me if I were to just, it's always good to mix things up,
I
but
mean, you know me, I am a late adopter of technology. I'm still getting used to the computer
yeah.
all these times later.
I know. I used to joke about your little organizer, right? Your
Oh yeah.
yes,
Oh yeah. And I still do,
paper.
index cards,
Yeah.
paper index cards for to-do lists.
I might go that path soon. So tell me about the next question that I tend to ask, the third one, is about the day job tension. I get a sense from what you've said so far, it was less attention and more really quite complementary to your life. But what was that like writing with alongside your professional life?
So
What it did to your brain almost doing that?
so when I was working, I was a nighttime writer.
Mm,
And that sort of fits with where I am in terms of biorhythms. I am a night person. I mean, I worked and I used to get up at 4:30 in the morning, go work out when I was on the road because the end of the day was definitely not predictable.
right.
But if I wrote, it was at the end of the day, and I would pull some things together. I'm still falling into that, where I tend to write at the end of the day. I'm really good between 5 o'clock at night and 10 o'clock at night, or sometimes Billy and I will stop, eat dinner, watch TV. She'll go to bed, and I'll write
Right.
till 1 or 2 in the morning. But the work actually, the work is complementary. I mean, my writing was always for work, so it was something I thought of during a training session, a leadership meeting, or something someone said. I might have jotted a couple of notes down, but then I wrote, and then I would use that as a position paper, or sometimes I would use it later in a proposal. Um, and
Interesting.
then so they did sort of mesh together that
Right.
way.
Right. And I think consulting is wonderful that way. It allows you to play a little,
Oh
right?
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you often have to write position papers. You certainly have to write proposals that explain what you're doing and the thought process
Right.
behind it.
Right.
So
Right.
that makes a lot of sense. Of course, we're talking about business writing. I mean, I it's funny, I wrote fiction a lot in my, high school, elementary school and high school years. A little bit in college, though I tended to write poetry more in college. And I want to get back to fiction. I would like to do that at some point.
It's interesting. There are times when I have used my fiction writing to actually, used or capture some of the interpersonal tensions or flow that you'll end
Mm.
up experiencing. So it is
Oh yeah.
actually an interesting, you recognize, oh, there was this expression on the face that should have clued me into what was going to
Oh
happen. And then I think
yeah.
it'd be interesting to make, Color do that, right? So
No, it is all about people.
it's all
And
about
so
you.
change is always all about people. It's somebody doing something different or differently.
Yeah,
But, so that, and when you consider a story,
yeah,
there's people involved and reactions involved. So sure,
yeah,
there'd
yeah.
be a natural feed to it.
Yeah, and of
Absolutely.
course, with business, you're trying to aggregate experiences across, insights across all of your experiences, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yes, I,
So,
I absolutely see that.
yeah. So I'll transition into what I call the abandoned idea, which is my fourth question, which is what's the book you started, or maybe piece of writing you started, got deep into, and then had to walk away, or an idea you've toyed with, right? What does it say, perhaps, about you or where you are as a person that you did it, were as the person that you couldn't finish it then? Because I always ask it in that past tense because I always hold hope that nothing stays abandoned forever.
So I don't have the 1,500 page Fountain City like Michael Chabon wrote. He wrote 1,500 pages and then decided he didn't like it, and then wrote The Wonder Boys to make fun of himself in that situation. I don't have one of those. I mean, I did write a piece called Living in the Comment Complex, which was about the combination of communications and entertainment. And I wrote this for a class in business school in 1981. Professor really liked it, sent it to Michael Peacock, who was the head of video arts. And Michael Peacock said, "Well, I'd really like to meet this guy." Of course, he said that in the end of May of my senior year at business school, and I was, I already had a job. I was doing this kind of stuff. And while I would have liked to have met with him, it just didn't work out. And I always thought I would turn that into a book. Um, and then Neil Postman wrote in 1985, wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is kind of the same idea.
Right.
Um, and I've used that a little bit in my work, but I've kind of walked away from that at this point. And I had a chapter in the next book about it, and I said, "This is old news. This is really, really old news at this point." So I pulled out a lot of the things out of that chapter at this point. I don't think I will get back to that.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Well, there's always another life, I feel. Like there was this point when I had a couple of chapters that I worked so hard, what I considered my beautiful chapters, and it just didn't, like the editor came
they
back
didn't.
and said, line right through, saying this doesn't fit, it doesn't move the story forward. And I keep thinking,
Oh.
it'll come back someday.
Save it, save it.
Save it.
I do save everything, although I didn't save the original paper. I went on this purging thing at one point, and I had a huge file of all these things that was going to go into that book. And I said, I'm never going to write this. And I didn't, and I threw it out. And in there was the original draft, a typewritten draft.
No.
So, hey,
These things happen, right?
yeah, they do.
Yeah.
But, it's all right.
So let's talk. You've had these great books that have come out, and there's one coming out soon. You have to tell us more
Yeah.
about that. But what do you call what I call my shelf test, right? When you finish a book, you have an internal sense of whether it succeeded, and it's not, in today's day and age, it's not about the numbers, right? But what is, it is what it is.
You
What is
mean
your
it's not about book sales? It's not about, breaking even? Oh,
to be
I
in those
mean,
old
I gave up on that a
days?
long time ago, but.
Well, the interesting thing is if you go back and look at all the greats, those were not the metrics that they aspired to either. So,
No,
we should feel
no.
like, but what is your personal measure of success?
So I'm
Yeah,
a legacy writer. I'm writing I'm an old man writing to share what I learned along the way. And whether it's about consulting, whether it's about leading, or the next book is about, living what I learned from interactions with ordinary people in many cases, so that shared some wisdom with me. And so if one person reads my book and says, I read your book and it really helped me, that's enough. That's enough. And I've been fortunate
yeah,
for the first two books to have that happen several times. And it really is very gratifying. And somebody, sometimes they will put it in a review, sometimes they don't, but sometimes they just send me an email and say, I looked at this and I really got something out of it and it made a difference.
yeah.
And that really does feel good.
It's so true. I mean, every once in a while I'll get a LinkedIn note and about the career catapult, which is from 2017, and
Yeah.
that's so nice.
Oh, it is. It is. It's a great book and with a lot of great advice in it. So that's good.
So, the last and final The necessary lie. All writers protect something, a belief about themselves, their process, their work, their readers, that probably isn't entirely true, but keeps them going. What is yours?
I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate. No, no, I won't. Um, no. So wisdom. Wisdom, this word is in the subtitle or in the title of all three of my books. And I am not wise. I am not, and I get embarrassed when anybody says, "Oh, thanks for your wisdom," because I'm more of a wise ass or a wiseacre or a wise guy rather than somebody who is genuinely wise. I am a seeker of wisdom. I try to recognize it when it appears, but it is. So that's the lie, really. I put it out there. It's in the title and all of that stuff. But I'm hoping that if I live to 100, there might be some little part of me that's wise.
You are joking. I think of you as my guru and truly wise. And
Far, far from it. Far from it.
But truly, thank you. These were my six questions, and I truly appreciate you coming to play on my podcast. This is all about helping people who are either thinking about writing or want to understand the process or sure that they don't want to write, just engaging around some of those truly internal questions that we might
Hmm.
ask ourselves, right? So thank
Well,
you
it's
for
been
sharing.
fun. It's
Thank
been
you.
fun. Thank you very much, Roopa.